With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350-plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Lowe's knows that more projects mean more tools. For a limited time, new and existing MyLowe's Rewards credit card members can get 12-month special financing on purchases of $299 or more, in-store and online. Don't wait to get the things you need. Get special financing today. Lowe's. We help. You save. Now through August 27th, choose 12-month special financing on purchases of $299 or more. Offer subject to credit approval and cannot be combined. Minimum monthly payments required. See store at Lowe's.com for details.
The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
3 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned for another exciting edition of the Dr. Sky Experience. We're here and proudly on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Get in early on the conversation. As always, great guest as we move back to our regular realms of subject matter from the realms of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, with an emphasis on weather and the story of climate change, whether you're a believer or somewhere in the middle or even a denier. But breaking news continues here for our friends and listeners throughout the tri-state area. A 3.8 magnitude earthquake struck northeastern New Jersey late Saturday night, as many may already know, sending tremors across New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. The event occurred at 10:18 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, with its epicenter located in Hasbrook Heights, a Bergen County community. The tremor were felt all the way into New York City and areas around the tri-state. We'll keep you posted on that as we continue here, and I'm sure the WABC newsroom will be, of course, updating you all through the night. We continue, ladies and gentlemen, talking about the great subjects of astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. If you'd like to email me, Dr. Sky, it's just DRSKY, of course, at WABCRadio.com. And if you'd always like to listen, and we hope you will, and want to, of course, listen to not only this particular archive, the Dr. Sky Experience, but all the many great hosts that are so much in focus with the subject matters that they talk about, the archive for all of us is simply WABCRadio.com or RedAppleAudioNetworks.com. A special shout-out to Tony and Bill. They're the helmsmen. Without them, this radio show would not sound as good as it's coming to you, and hopefully it is. I'm confident of that. They navigate this powerful signal of 77 WABC to you, the nation, the world, and I'm even sure out into the cosmos. You may have different opinions on the subject that we're going to be talking about, and in a few minutes we'll introduce a guest that's been on the Dr. Sky Experience in the past, and hopefully he'll continue in the future. We'll introduce in just a moment Tom Harris. Who's he? The Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. But ladies and gentlemen, before that, not to make this sound like we're in a classroom at this early hour or evening that you're listening to us, but a definition of weather goes like this: the state of the atmosphere at a place and time with regard to heat, dryness, pressure, sunshine, wind speed, rain, etc. But a definition on the other side of climate goes like this: average weather in a given area over a longer period of time, and maybe even as long as 30 or more years. Did you know there are 5 types of climate? That's true: tropical, temperate, arid, continental, and polar. But in my opinion, studying the world of astronomy for years, all weather naturally comes from the sun. And folks, if you're like me, maybe this would be a dream vacation for me, or maybe you've done this. They say one of the best climates on the entire earth is the beautiful archipelago or area called the Canary Islands. Between 2015 and 2024, we've registered some of the warmest temperatures. But there are many people out there that do not necessarily believe that climate change is real, and in this particular show, we try to balance out the equation. Our special guest, Tom Harris, the International Climate Science Coalition. His organization is a nonprofit group of independent scientists, economists, and energy and policy experts formed in 2008 to promote better understanding of climate science and policy worldwide. Their organization aims to help create an environment in which a more rational, open discussion about climate issues emerges, thereby moving the debate away from the implementation of costly and ineffective climate control measures. The organization encourages assisting, that is, vulnerable peoples to adapt to climate variability and continuing scientific research into the causes and impact of climate change. Tom Harris lives and works in the Canadian capital, just above New York State, Ottawa, Canada. He has 30 years' experience as a mechanical engineer, project manager, science and technology communications professional, and a technical trainer. He was science and technology advisor to a former opposition senior environment critic in Canada's Parliament from 2006 to 2008. And he was the executive director of the National and Natural Resources Stewardship Project in Canada. With that long and hopefully complete introduction, good morning to Tom Harris. Tom, how are you up in Canada?
Oh, I'm great. How are you, Dr. Sky?
I'm doing well, my friend, and we just got that news, which I'm sure many in the New York metro area have heard already, but we didn't want to be redundant, and that will also be part and parcel later in our conversation. And folks, if you have questions about the great subject that we're talking about, one of the great realms that we love, astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, the number, of course, your number direct to us is 1-800-848-9222. Tom Harris, take us down the road of some of the new things that you would like to talk about, because I have tons of them, and I'm sure the listeners out there, pro or con, on the subject of climate change. Let's begin, and let's hear from you.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that the Trump administration is going to rescind the endangerment finding against greenhouse gases. And, of course, in the United States, if you don't count water vapor, the main greenhouse gas that we're emitting, 80% of it is carbon dioxide. So he's, Trump and the head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, they're actually going to withdraw the endangerment finding. And, this is something that people should understand where it came from. Because, the environmental groups have been trying for decades to get carbon dioxide declared a pollutant that should be controlled under the Clean Air Act. But the Bush administration, the most recent one, they actually turned it down. But, of course, just before Obama came in, the Supreme Court did this, and this is very important, and it's something that's going to have to be overturned. The Supreme Court in 2007 made a decision in a court case called Massachusetts versus EPA that greenhouse gases were pollutants that could be controlled under the Clean Air Act. And so the EPA had an obligation, a legal obligation, to make a finding as to whether or not they caused dangerous and hazard to human health and welfare. Now, of course, they didn't do much when Bush was still president, but as soon as Obama came in, the endangerment finding against primarily carbon dioxide was enabled. And that was in 2009, in the beginning of Obama's terms, but that became the foundation for literally $1 trillion in regulations. And the withdrawal of this particular endangerment finding, which is what the EPA are doing right now, will save $54 billion a year. Okay, it's a massive deal. And I'd say if they succeed, and it's going to go right to the Supreme Court, and we can talk about the legal side in a minute, but if they succeed, this will be a huge benefit to all Americans.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, under the restrictive side of the Obama and Biden administration, we see a lot of these things popping in the other direction. So give us a couple of these other, areas. Let's talk about wind power, because apparently the president's not too keen on that, and so many people who do believe that that's not an answer to sustainable energy. Let's talk about what they're trying to do there with wind power. Is there any specifics you can give the audience?
Yeah, he's trying to end all offshore wind power, and that's a very good thing to do because already we know that it's messing up the migration patterns of whales, not just during the operation, but especially during the construction. If you think about it, let's say somebody dropped a magnesium flare in your backyard. I mean, that would blind you. That would be terrible. My dad dropped those during World War II, and he said it would light up the ocean for 10 miles. Okay? Mm-hmm. Well, when we're pile driving into the ocean floor to make the foundation for these wind turbines, it's causing sound waves. And, of course, whales see by sound primarily, as sonar. It's causing sound waves. The sound waves are equivalent to dropping a magnesium flare in your backyard when it comes to the whales. And so it is literally messing them up. Their navigation is put off. We think that they may actually be being killed. We're not sure. But the bottom line is Trump has said until they show that it's not a hazard to whales, he doesn't want to see any more of those at all.
Well, I salute the president, as many people do, because the cetaceans that occupy the oceans, they've been around a lot longer, right, Tom, than we have. And you're so right. I mean, whether you watch one of the Star Trek movies where I guess Mr. Spock melded with one of the whales, that's another story in science fiction, but it also has a lot to say about how precious they are and how we need to keep the oceans free. And also, there's other sound waves that are coming. That's a story for another time. But let's also talk about the impact that birds. We've had specialists in ornithology, the birds. We will have another gentleman, Mr. Dr. Farnsworth, coming up later in the month, talking about things going on with birds. And if you've ever seen, I'm sure you have, and maybe people haven't, the propellers on those things, when they transport them, it's like they need a whole armada just to get them down the street. And God help us, how do they make a turn on the street? I have no idea.
Yeah, well, in fact, there was one wind farm in California, the Altamont Pass. It's been operating for about 40 years, and they kill dozens of golden eagles every year. Wow. You know, so the death toll of, these large birds, you kill one of those, and it has a significant impact on the local environment. You know, one thing I got to point out, though, is that bats, which are crucially important. I mean, they control our mosquito population.
They do.
Bats are being killed at twice the rate of birds. And there's a good reason for this. Birds have to actually be hit by the turbine blade to be killed, whereas a bat, obviously, if it's hit, it's killed. But if they fly in the low-pressure zone behind the blade, their lungs burst and they drown in their own blood. And so it's a gruesome death, and in fact, this is a major problem. They're saying that in some regions, it will drive some bat species to extinction by this supposedly green energy.
Absolutely. In other words, look, this is open to the conversation here for people who believe, don't believe, and that's why what we do on this program, No Apology, is what? Open people's minds about these interesting subjects. And like we say, we like, as there are 4 types of conversation, without putting people to sleep, we love a conversation with dialogue. You can disagree all you want, but we welcome your conversation on this very important subject. Maybe many people out there haven't heard about half of this, but I'm so certain that this is why we do this. The contact number, 1-800-848-9222. And I need not remind our California friends that are listening to Talk Radio 77 WABC. We know you're out there. If you drive right, Tom, by the Palm Springs area and coming, let's say, when I drive over to Los Angeles, albeit ever infrequently, you come across that that whole big valley with nothing but a overpopulated area of these turbine blades. It's just a different sight, let's put it that way. So I'm fascinated by this particular subject. But what other things is happening at the EPA with Mr. Zeldin? I appreciate learning more, and so do our listeners, about some of the things that this administration is trying to go back and cancel from this other, intense environmental issues that many people are not happy with.
Well, right. And one of the things that actually it's the head of the Energy Department did this. Okay, this is really important. They were looking ahead, and they knew that they would have to have science justification for withdrawing the endangerment finding for carbon dioxide. So Chris Wright, who's the head of the Department of Energy, he chose 5 top leading scientists, one of them an economist, and he asked them, find out how reliable is the science that's being used to back up the climate scare, to back up the endangerment finding and all the tailpipe emissions and all that sort of thing. And they released their report just before this withdrawal of the endangerment finding was announced. And it's actually open. The report is open for public comment on the U.S. Register right now. And the endangerment finding is also open for comment. And later this month, the 19th and the 20th, they're going to have virtual comments from the public on the endangerment finding. But the really important thing that Chris Wright did is he got these leading experts together. And I'll just list them. There's just 5 of them.
Yes, please.
The pair, Christie and John Christie and Roy Spencer. These are the satellite gurus, the people who tell us what the temperatures are based on satellite across the world. They also brought in Steve Koonin, who, believe it or not, was actually a top advisor for climate in the Obama administration. They also brought in Ross McKittrick from Guelph University, a leading economist who understands the social cost of carbon, which is a bit of a joke. We can talk about that later. And the last one was Judith Curry. She was previously with Georgia Institute of Technology, also a leading climate expert. And what these people found was that the science does not support the climate scare. And they said that if the U.S. does what the current endangerment finding is forcing them to do, it will have negligible impact on climate. It won't even be detectable in most cases. They're also saying that the economic damage caused by warming because of CO2 has been grossly exaggerated, massively exaggerated. So these two things, the endangerment finding and then this report from the Department of Energy, which now backs it up, are very important developments. I put my hat off to Chris Wright for, Department of Energy and Lee Zeldin from EPA. They're doing a great job.
Absolutely. This is amazing. Our special guest, if you're just tuning in, here to the Dr. Sky Experience on Talk Radio 77, WABC, is Tom Harris. He's the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. He comes to us from Ottawa, Canada, where, of course, ladies and gentlemen, he's jam-packed with information. I wanted you to, as if we're doing like a little seminar for education here, and I appreciate both sides of the conversation, talk a little bit more about the whole evolution of the Paris Climate Accord and what it is, because many people keep hearing that. Well, according to the the Paris Climate Accord, this and that is what their focus is, and all the nations just link up to this. And again, tell us more how that gets started and what is it, so people know where this conversation goes.
Yeah, and it's really important that they understand where it came from, because what it'll show you is that the developing countries, and they still list China as a developing country under the climate agreements, they have no targets at all. And people don't understand this. You see, you got to go back to 1992. When the first George Bush, actually agreed to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They agreed to this at the Earth Summit in Brazil, 1992, and our Prime Minister Mulroney agreed too. And that laid the foundation for decades now of climate agreements like the Paris Accord, like the Kyoto Protocol, things like that. So this was the foundation, the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it's really important people understand that the Framework Convention has something called Article 4, and it says that the overriding priority of developing nations is not greenhouse gas emissions, it's poverty alleviation and development. So they have an out clause. They have an out clause, and people don't know this. They say, according to the Paris Agreement, China has to cap its emissions in 2030 and not increase further. But what's going to happen, Dr. Sky, is they're going to soar right through that limit. And then when people say, well, what the heck? You agreed in the Paris Agreement to cap your emissions. They're going to point back at the fundamental underlying document, which is the rules for the UN climate treaties, and they're going to say, we have an out clause. It's right here. So they're going to go, they have double the U.S. emissions right now coming from China. It's going to be triple by 2030, and they will continue to increase as much as they want. Now, you laugh, Dr. Sky, this is one thing that's quite funny. At the climate conference in Peru in 2014, they cornered the Chinese ambassador, Chinese negotiator, and they said, look, this is kind of unfair. China's not really a developing country anymore, and you guys you'll have no limits at all based on the Framework Convention. And so, because they were negotiating the Paris Agreement at the time, and the Chinese negotiator, knowing that they have a really great situation, he said the purpose of the Paris Agreement is to enforce the Framework Convention, not to change it. So they know they have a sweetheart deal. So not surprisingly, the Chinese, want to see the climate scare continue. And of course, they are, according to some politicians in Washington, they're investigating it right now. They're funding, apparently, some of the environmental groups that are trying to force the United States to stay on this climate route.
That's amazing, Tom. Right, and I know in the universities they have something called the Confucius Institute where they talk about, loyalty to the Communist Chinese Party. I'm not an expert on that subject. We have other people that we can talk to, but we're talking with you. And one of the specifics I wanted to talk about, because people may not know this, what was the number metric that they set at the Paris Climate Accord about? In other words, we must keep temperatures down, or is that the way to say it?
Yeah.
It shouldn't exceed. What is that metric that they're saying the world should not exceed, and thus the panacea or the concern, depending on who's listening and who cares?
Well, they say we have to keep it below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, in other words, 1850 or earlier. But it's more desirable to have a 1.5 degree limit. So they're trying to have a 1.5 degree limit. The thing is, we're almost there already. I mean, since 1880, this so-called global temperature, which is kind of a meaningless statistic because nobody lives in the globe, we all experience individual temperatures in regions. But regardless, it's already increased 1.2 degrees since 1880. So, I mean, are you going to tell me that 0.3 degrees in this fictitious global temperature is going to cause the end of the world? I mean, it's just silly. Richard Lindzen and others, when they look at these temperatures, one of the things they say, Richard Lindzen's from MIT, one of the leading scientists in the world, actually, and we can talk about an open letter that he, along with two others, sent to the court in The Hague, and they've just ignored it with their recent judgment. But he says that kind of temperature change, 1.2 degrees C in 145 years, is so small you wouldn't notice it in your entire life.
Well, this is interesting, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, we reach out far and wide with the power of Talk Radio 77 WABC. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen out there? Are you buying into some of the climate change so-called scare? Or are you more on the side of saying, oh, this is absolutely a hoax? Or, respectfully, if you really believe it, come to the table. Give us your information, and this is not necessarily a debate. We don't really want to do that per se, but you're welcome at 1-800-848-9222. And we're not trying to filter conversation, certainly not, because our special guest, Tom Harris, who is he? The executive director at the International Climate Science Coalition. Very simply, from one man to another to the entire audience out there, what got you interested in this? I mean, you talk about being an engineer.
Yeah.
One day, were you just sitting in the car and your AC went out and you said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I'm not trying to be funny. How did you get started in being so concerned?
I was an aerospace engineer, and my specialty was jet engines for fighter aircraft and stuff like that. And but I would actually give speeches promoting the space program because I've always been a Star Trek fan. And, I was 16 when they landed on the moon for the first time. I have all the newspapers. I've always been a real enthusiast for the space program. I just love it. And I used to say in my speeches that I gave lots of speeches to conferences and to schools. And I used to say, look, exploring the planets helps us better understand the Earth. And I gave various examples, like the greenhouse effect on Venus. And one thing I said, and it turned out to be wrong, it turned out I was totally wrong. I said, the runaway greenhouse effect on Venus, where it's 95% carbon dioxide, is a warning as to what could happen on the Earth if, we don't control our CO2. Now, a local scientist who doesn't want me to use his name because he gets in trouble with his university, but regardless, it's very dangerous for these scientists to speak out. They can lose their jobs. Anyway, a local scientist, he liked my article so much that he used it in his course, and he said it's great, but that part is wrong. The science part of the Venus thing is wrong, and there's lots of reasons why Venus is so hot. CO2 is only one of them. But what he said is, look, this cannot physically happen on the Earth because we have oceans that absorb the CO2, and we have plate tectonics at the bottom of the ocean that pulls the absorbed carbon into the Earth's crust, and it's constantly replenishing, so it's always a sink pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere.
No, that's amazing, Tom. I'm not to cut you short, but I got to say something, and I hope you'll indulge me in this since we talk about aviation, and you're an aerospace engineer. Well, I just want either a yay or a nay from you. Can you talk, and obviously many people have, about the Canadian Avro Arrow aircraft, one of the coolest airplanes I've ever seen? Are you familiar with it?
Oh, certainly. Mach 2. In fact, my master's thesis supervisor was the engine guy on the Avro Arrow. So, he always told us about what happened that day. It was a disaster. Canada had built by far the most advanced fighter in history. It was Mach 2 plus. This was in the late 1950s. And apparently various forces didn't like that. They didn't want to have Canada with the leading fighter in the world. And the Canadian government buckled, and they actually destroyed it, sadly. And a lot of our engineers that were working the Avro Arrow ended up working for NASA and were involved then in the moon landing. A lot of people don't realize, but there's a lot of Canadian content in the moon landing. The chief doctor, for example, was a Canadian. The first items to touch the moon on Apollo 11 were made in Lachine, Quebec. There are those little sensors that hang down from the lunar landing pods.
Tom. Totally amazing. Yeah. You know what we need to do here? We're going to come up on the heartbreak in here a minute. And I hate to cut a guy with so much energy here, but for another time, I'd love to talk with you about that. And also, about a Canadian so-called flying saucer type of aircraft that they developed, but that's for another subject at another time.
Sure.
In another dimension. But with us, ladies and gentlemen, talking about this very intelligently, obviously that's why we select a guest like Tom Harris. He's Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition, jam-packed with information here, talking about these subjects. But what I'd like to get into in the next half hour of our 2-hour conversation here, 1-800-848-9222, ladies and gentlemen, for your questions and comments. This is serious stuff here because apparently what the Trump administration is doing, we're trying to unravel so many of these restrictive covenants. Now, many people may not like that, but in all due respect to the economy and things of that nature, well, that's what the people out there, I'm sure, will call in on with concerns about that. But when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about how the sun drives all weather. I mean, that's one of my specialty areas. I know you know this well. And we'll leave them in the next couple of minutes with just a couple of teasers. Because, Tom, obviously the big fusion ball in the sky, we always say, and I don't think you would disagree at all weather primarily comes from the sun. I mean, that's a general broad-based statement. No division or divisiveness there, right? That's a statement.
Oh, yeah. I agree completely. Yep. Yeah. In fact, the sun is becoming, if you look at the latest science, is almost certainly the primary driver of the warming of the last century.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something that we don't see. And again, I don't want to attack anybody out there who believes, and of course, that's never my mantra, to attack, and nor do you. I mean, we're having a fair and open conversation here. We like dialogue. And that's so important because the Dr. Sky experience, ladies and gentlemen, in case you're a first-time listener, we really appreciate you. And anybody out there that's driving, we always say this to the truck drivers, men and women, the proud drivers who deliver the things that we need every day, the unsung heroes. Really, seriously, this is an interesting story. I'm sure in many of them they're listening to this particular archive. We welcome your calls. Tell us where you are. And obviously, you're probably very concerned about the price of fuel and what happens in a climate-intensive world. A very, very interesting subject. Tom, in this first half hour, how do people get in touch with you as we move into the next half hour?
Yeah, sure. The best way is to go to our homepage, which is www.icsc-climate.com. They can also listen to my shows on America Out Loud. America Out Loud has a podcast, and our podcast is called The Other Side of the Story. We do shows every week, and we talked actually this week exactly about the things that we're talking about now.
Wow. So there you go.
Something people can log in there and just search under shows, and you'll see The Other Side of the Story, which I host along with Todd Royal, who's a energy expert from Dallas. So it's a real fun show.
More when we come back, ladies and gentlemen, as we move to the hard break on a show that we call the Dr. Sky Experience. Hope you're with us, 1-800-848-9222. Your calls are welcome. Conversation as we like in the form of dialogue. We'll be right back with much more with our special guest, Tom Harris.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
A foolish faith in authority is the worst enemy of truth. An incredible quote that is, from one of the geniuses in astrophysics and the story of gravity, Albert Einstein. 32 minutes after the hour, and of course we want to thank the late Carol Channing for joining us with her speech, her little information, and her little promotion that we talk about keeping your eyes to the skies. Our special guest, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the National Climate Science Coalition, is here with us. And you know what? You're lighting up the phone lines. I wouldn't expect anything less, Tom. So let's say good morning to Alice in Ohio. Good morning, Alice. You're on with Tom Harris. How are you this morning or evening?
Very well. Oh, very well. Thank you for asking. This is an interesting subject, and it's way above my pay grade. But I happen to agree with Mr. Harris. Mother Nature is cyclical. For example, Chatham, Mass., which is in the elbow of Cape Cod, the beaches were being eroded. Well, it has happened before, and then Mother Nature replenishes it. At the same time, I think around Myrtle Beach, the same thing was happening. Mother Nature will replenish it. I wish I understood why someone would want to put windmills out in the ocean, and why would they put windmills in the middle of a cornfield? It's killing birds, killing whales. I agree with you, and thank you so much for bringing this up.
Well, Alice, we appreciate you, and there's many good reasons why people should be paying attention to this, but I don't want to steal your thunder, Tom. Alice, I think she's made some good points. Your response?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, the main reason they're putting up the wind turbines is because the wind turbine companies are making an absolute fortune. Like across the world right now, there is, believe it or not, $3 billion a day being spent on climate finance. And most of it goes to the wind and solar power companies. Okay, so they have a vast incentive, a massive incentive to keep the scare going. There are other people who think that the government should be the controller of our energy. And as long as we're dependent on things like wind and solar power, you need huge government subsidies or they're not economic. And that, of course, means that more and more wind and solar mean the government come in charge. They become in charge of our energy. Things like coal, they don't need government support. I mean, yes. Coal is a cheap, inexpensive, very powerful energy source that built the United States, along with oil. And don't need it. But for those who think the government should run everything, they love wind and solar power because, of course, they need massive government subsidies.
That's amazing. Alice, I don't know if you're still with us, but we always give our guests, and go ahead, please. You get the final word.
Thank you. You brought up something political. I have felt that there was something political around this. I don't know that much about it, but yes, I think there was a lot of politics involved in it. A lot of people were look at Solyndra. That failed.
Exactly.
That failed. And the old saying, don't fool around with Mother Nature.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
That's right.
And the massacre of the birds and bats is really sad because, this will destroy our environment. It's funny. There's a film called Planet of the Humans put out by Michael Moore, a left-wing film producer, and he shows, and you have to look this up, Alice, type in Planet of the Humans. You can actually watch it for free on the Internet. He shows clearly that when you look at how they're made and how they operate, wind and solar power are the dirtiest energy sources on the planet.
Yes,
wow.
And there's something else about bats. They are fascinating. I have a bat house.
They sure are.
Yeah, there's a bat house on a tree on my property, and it was a gift to my late husband. But yes, you are absolutely right, and thank you so much for speaking up for people like me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, Alice, as you know, the signal of Talk Radio 77 WABC is powerful. We thank Alice in the Buckeye State in Ohio. But I want to ask you about something or mention something to the audience. Alice brought it up. We know from science, 5 major extinctions: the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Permian, the Triassic, Cretaceous. I mean, we could go line by line to talk about this. But she brings up a good point. Not that we intend to go out and just say, today I'm going to poison the ground with mercury. I'm going to poison it with all kinds of chemicals and, the batteries that explode and things of that nature. But the Earth does have. That's an interesting thing. Bring that to the table, Tom. The Earth does have this healing effect over the course of, look at how many years the Earth's been around and bombarded.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the common thesis in the environmental movement is that the Earth is on this sort of knife edge. It's such a fragile system. All we have to do is push it a little bit, and it'll go to catastrophe. But that hasn't happened in history.
Right.
Okay, and this is, the end of my story with this local scientist who said that I was wrong on the Venus thing. He showed me the geologic history of the Earth along with carbon dioxide and temperature. And right now, we're at one of the lowest levels of CO2 in Earth's history. And you go back, let's say, 400 million years, which is when it was the coldest in the last 500 million years. That was so cold, some people, scientists, they actually think that even the oceans were covered with ice. CO2 levels were more than 10 times higher than today. And this is what changed me from a climate alarmist to a climate realist. I looked at the geologic record. I contacted other scientists. And what was clear is that there are cycles in the Earth system that have nothing to do with humans. CO2 will go up, it'll go down, and temperatures will go up. And there's no correlation. That's the amazing thing. Sometimes CO2 is 10 times higher than today, and we're in very cold conditions. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's just in the middle. And, that's where the climate activists just have missed the boat. If they actually look at the record, it doesn't support the climate scare.
Right. This is an amazing topic, ladies and gentlemen. Our special guest, Tom Harris, will continue here. Let's say good morning to Carlos in the Bronx. Good morning, Carlos. Your comments and questions on the subject of the hour.
Hey, good morning. How you doing? This is our first-time listener, and I just happened to turn on the radio, come in here and, on the highway here by Yonkers.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I find it so fascinating, right, that you're talking about. And you reference a lot of things about Star Trek and that. And I remember when you had those commercials back in the 70s with Leonard Nimoy, and he used to talk about, it's going to be the next ice age in the next 10 years. And then it was
remember that?
And
they thought that
you got it.
Ice ages were coming.
Yeah, and then it was the acid rain. The acid rain is going to happen. And the ozone, there's a big hole in the ozone. And, back then, you get into these discussions with people that are real, or, obviously on the left or whatever, the climate change.
You're right, Carlos.
Whatever you want to call them. And I get into these real, debates, and I said, well, wait a minute, it doesn't make sense, and then you got what's the name? I'm sorry, Harry, the one who flies, and he goes, he goes out there, talks in Congress, and pretends he knows what he's doing, yet he takes his, massive jet over there to debate and
Al Gore, Carlos, I got to tell you about a new book. It's actually put out by Bob Carter. And actually, it's not that new, it appears. But in the introduction to that book, he talks about what's called catastrophilia. Catastrophilia is the wide-eyed call to action, constantly to solve all these problems. And what we're seeing, and you just labeled it perfectly. I mean, it was global cooling, then it was acid rain, then it was ozone depletion, and now it's global warming.
Exactly.
This is catastrophilia. Because generally speaking, the Earth is not this sensitive system that's going to suddenly run to catastrophe. Pat Michaels, he just passed away, unfortunately. He was a meteorologist, climatologist from University of Virginia. He said, we should talk about the robust Earth. The Earth has recovered and survived much, much worse than anything
You say it so well there, Tom, and I want to ask Carlos a question. Carlos, we appreciate you as a first-time caller, but let me ask you, what got you electrified about this subject? To you, what's the most important thing, in your humble opinion? I think I know where you're going. You think this is a big fraud, a scam? Tell us.
This is more, in my opinion, it's just how the wording that is used, the manipulation, the propaganda, and the way that people understand that behind the scenes, and you just explained it, how the billions of dollars that is spent on nonsense and waste, and yet the media in itself, it's not out there. I don't know. It's like they have an agenda. Call me conspiracy realist. I'm
not at all.
Right. They do. And can I
use the word?
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead, gentlemen.
This is really important to understand. The media have an objective to sensationalize and make it look like a catastrophe, and there's several reasons for that. One is because catastrophe and bad news sells. You remember Johnny Cash said, good news travels slow, while bad news travels like wildfire. Good news travels slow.
Precisely.
And, Mark Twain said this, so the lie has got twice around the earth before the truth has its shoes on. And so the media knows that catastrophe sells media. But there's another reason, and this is a little bit more hidden, and that is that many of these companies, car companies, printing companies, all sorts of companies who say they're reducing greenhouse gases to save the earth, they're using that as a sales pitch to sell their products. And they buy full-page ads on newspapers for tens of thousands of dollars each. And so the last thing the newspaper wants is to have somebody on the next page saying the whole thing is bunk. Okay, and that was actually admitted to me by a leading Canadian editor. He said, look, we're not going to publish you guys. We're not going to publish you guys because our revenue comes from the advertisers who are using the climate scare to sell their products.
Carlos, you get the last word if you're with us. Thanks for calling and being a first-time caller. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Real quick, and I like when we were talking about the propaganda, the name change, and I remember I noticed that it was like it went from global warming all of a sudden to climate change. Wait a minute, this is like a word game they're playing. Now, one quick question before I leave, sir.
Go ahead.
That earthquake that happened in Russia and to talk about the tsunami, can you add on that anything to be concerned? Is that something that,
Carlos, I'm going to have to cut it short with this because we're almost up against the break, but I promise a good answer will come to you. But thanks for being a first-time caller. I hope you'll call the Dr. Sky Experience in the future. We got lots to share with you. So thanks for being on board with us, brother. Appreciate that. You know, Tom, the earthquake, I was on here on WABC the other night with the Rita Cosby Show discussing this, and it's interesting because we never did see, and thank goodness, the maximal damage that could have come from this particular undersea quake. And that's a mystery, too, as to what's going on, because somebody said to me, you know, hey, can we get a 10 or a 12 on the Richter scale? And I said, no, that's impossible, because the fault line, there's no fault line that would be necessitating that kind of a length for that kind of an impact. But that's an interesting story unto itself, how the whole Ring of Fire is just another fascinating story. So we got about a minute.
It shows how powerful nature is. I mean, it reminds me of, remember George Carlin, the comedian?
Yeah, I sure do.
Yeah, he was great. I'll just give you a quote because I just loved him. He said, okay, so these environmentalists are saying, save the whales, save the snails, save the trees, save the bees, save the planet? He says, what? We can't even save ourselves. We're going to worry about a few plastic bags?
You're right, and thank you for the quote that we didn't have to use beep, bleep, bleep on there, on the air, on public airwaves. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Tom Harris is our guest. Your calls are important to us. And if you didn't get on yet, Shay in New Jersey, Frank in Maine, and everybody else at 1-800-848-9222. We'll get to you as we talk about this important subject, the concept of climate change, reality or not. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Another quote from the late, great Albert Einstein. 46 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, we continue our conversation and dialogue with Tom Harris, Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition, spending his early Saturday morning and Sunday morning with us here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Wow, you really are very popular there, and I know you're a modest man, so let's say good morning to Shay in New Jersey. You've waited long enough. Good morning to you, sir. Your comment or question.
Good morning, Dr. Sky. You have a great show, and I'm a first-time caller.
Thank you, sir.
My question is two parts, a couple parts to it. Up until Thursday, this summer in the New York City area has seemed to be more humid than ever. The oceans are warmer, and I'm wondering am I correct that it has been abnormally humid, and if so, is that due to the warmer temperatures? And if the answer to that is yes, how does that work? Does the higher temperatures affect the jet stream or the Gulf Stream to raise the humidity?
Well, Shay, this is amazing, and thanks for being a first-time caller. Let's go to Tom first, and then I have something to add to that also that I think many people may find at least interesting from climatology. Tom, take that on. Sure. I think that's great what Shay's asking.
Yeah, you have to realize that for cities, they will generally get hotter and hotter because they're expanding. And you have something called the urban heat island. When you actually cut down a forest and put up a parking lot, it just absorbs more heat and releases it at night. So generally speaking, you're going to see cities setting records for higher and higher temperatures as they grow. But, here's something, Shay, that you probably don't know, and you should check it out on the web. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration have a database of all the extreme weather records for states. And a state is more meaningful because it's a much bigger area. And, they look at things like the maximum temperature, the most rain, the strongest wind gust, the biggest hailstone, things like that. And by the way, Colorado had a hailstone of, believe it or not, more than half a foot in diameter.
Glad that didn't hit my car, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is when you look at this database, and again, it's more meaningful than cities because cities have this urban heat island. When you look at the database, which is statewide records, what you find is that in 1936, in the middle of the Dust Bowl, there were 27 extreme weather records set. Okay, 27, like highest temperature and all sorts of things. Last year, there were 0. There was not a single record set in temperature, wind speed, all the different parameters. I don't know about humidity. I haven't seen that included in a database. But the only thing I have to point out is that New York's record, I don't know where, I don't have the database in front of me, but undoubtedly it was a long time ago. So whatever's happened in New York City is largely due to the urban heat island effect, and that certainly could increase humidity.
You know, Shay, I wanted to jump in with a theory here, and this is very interesting. It comes from meteorologists, not all the consensus, and Tom, I think you'd enjoy hearing this. You may know all about it. Shay, back in 2022, January, in the South Pacific near Fiji, there was an undersea volcano called the Hunga Tonga submarine volcano. That's a lot of words, right? Mm-hmm. Look this up, everybody. Shay, this is interesting. What they say happened, this was like a nuclear explosion. It killed many people, and obviously it was in a pretty remote area in the ocean. But what happened, the shock wave went around the Earth about 5 times and literally shook the Earth maybe a few millimeters in its positional location. But what is interesting, talking about, you're asking about humidity increases, things in the New York metro, they're saying that this pushed up so much vapor into the upper stratosphere that many, many weather systems around the world have been altered, not just now because of man-made climate change. But Shay, that's interesting. That could be one of the, conduits as to why this is happening. Isn't that fascinating, Shay? I mean, something like
what's the name of that volcano again?
Say it's called the Hunga Tonga submarine volcano. It's a lot to say.
But if you research it,
T-O-N-G-A. Like the Hunga, like H-U-N-G-A, Tonga, T-O-N-G-A, submarine volcano. Meteorologists, climatologists are saying that may have put so much vapor into the upper stratosphere because we're seeing different colored, sunsets, the most magnificent, beautiful purples and things. That's because volcano, we're going to get at this with Tom, Shay. The volcanism has been, a direct correlation to the CO2 production and, manifestation on the Earth. So, Shay, without a lot of words, thank you for being a first-time caller. I hope you'll join us again.
Yeah, I have noticed one related point that the pollution in certainly New York City has kept the daytime highs from not hitting 100 degrees since 2012, whereas out here in New Jersey, we've hit 100 many times.
Yeah, and you know what it could be, gentlemen. And again, I'm not the meteorologist on this by no means, and certainly I'm not the one to be the most qualified. Tom has much more details. But also look at the Canadian fires that have influenced the area in the New York area and the metropolitan area and the Northeast. Yeah. It's a very amazing story. Shay, thank you for being with us. I hate to cut it short because we're trying to get as many callers to the top of the hour, but everybody's important, and hope you'll call us again. Thank you so much. Let's say good morning now to Frank in the great state of Maine, the home of Stephen King, as we talk to Frank often. Good morning. How you doing up there?
I'm doing well, Dr. Sky. Interesting conversation about climate change. And Carlos stole some of my thunder. I remember that In Search of a show with the oncoming ice age. I remember that show, believe it or not, in 1975 when Leonard Nimoy did it. But the media with The Day After Tomorrow and Geostorm and these movies that exacerbate the issue of climate change and what's going to happen to the Earth. Does that and to Mr. Harris, does that make your job a little bit harder that the media is totally against you and for these climate people that are the climate activists that are actually like trying to promote these big windmills that will eventually destroy the whales?
Great question, Frank. Always a good one from you.
Yeah, and there's no question that it is difficult to get the word out when the media are so biased. I mean, back around 2005, I would get published from coast to coast across Canada and in many newspapers in the United States. But around 2005, partly because of Al Gore and because of the movement towards the left in many institutions, the media just pulled back, and they suddenly decided that they were not going to publish us deniers. And, of course, the reason was partly because of finance. They wanted to sell more advertising. But, the left have been incredibly successful using what's called Alinsky's rules. Okay, Saul Alinsky was a community organizer in Chicago around 1970, Absolutely. And he wrote a book that everybody, even on the conservative side, maybe especially on the conservative side, should read. It's called Rules for Radicals. And he lays out how you change society, how you make it so that some things are politically correct and some things are not. And we have to use the same tactics to take back these institutions. The media, for example, used to be, the kind of examiner of both sides of issues, but they're not anymore. They're propaganda, and it's very difficult to get published. I mean, the Washington Times will publish this. Forget about the Washington Post. I used to even get articles in the Los Angeles Times, but I can't get that anymore because, like you suggested, the media have all sided with the climate scare, largely because it's politically correct and because it's
and of course being facetious, ladies and gentlemen. It's settled, right? I mean, come on, now, give me a break. Yeah. Let's have more conversation. Frank, you get the last word. We're almost out of time, but always it's a pleasure to hear you and appreciate what you do and calling in with great questions and content.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Sky. I appreciate that. Up here in Maine, I think President Trump stopped this train, but they were trying to put windmills off the coast of Bar Harbor, Maine, where Arcadia National Park is. And I think people were up in arms because of the natural beauty of Arcadia. So that was stopped temporarily. But the governor up here she is an activist, crazy person who wants to put windmills and make sure that everybody drives electric cars. So we're trying to stop it up here, but always a pleasure, Dr. Sky, whenever I get
Well, thank you, Frank. I always appreciate you and your commentary to the show. But I wanted to add something, Tom, before the clock runs out here. Joe, going back to our New York audience, primarily here, the home of Talk Radio 77, WABC, of course, and to everybody around the nation, let's take, in accordance with Tom is saying here, and I get it loud and clear, that we cannot just blame humans for the temperature changes. Here we go. In the state of New York, the maximum temperature was 108 degrees back on July 22nd of 1926 in Troy, New York. The minimum temperature was 52 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, February the 18th, 1979 in Old Forge, New York. And in 24 hours, the highest precipitation, according to a reliable source that I'm quoting, 13.57 inches that occurred between August the 12th and 13th, 2014 at Long Island's MacArthur Airport. And then how about this? Continuing on only before the clock runs out. The highest is New York 24-hour snowfall in New York State, 50 inches back on February 1st, 1966 in Camden. And the deepest snow depth in New York State, and ready, 119 inches back on April 20th, 1943, Whiteface Mountains. If you go back in time, right, Tom? How can all that be attributed to humans way back then?
That's right. When people say, you're a climate change denier, I say, no, climate change is all the time. I mean, I deny that I deny climate change. I'm a denial
I never thought
denier.
of that one. Climate changes all the time. It's very good.
Yeah, of course.
No, that's interesting.
It's a good thing because where I'm standing right now, there was 2 kilometers of ice 25,000 years ago. So thank God for climate change.
You got it. And let me just go out to our New York audience right now. We're hearing reports, of course, of the earthquake that's happened hours ago. I wonder if our listeners in the New York metro area, did you feel anything? Some say, as of course the WABC newsroom is going to be, of course, and they are already on top of this, we'll be hearing much more about it. But interesting information as it correlates to the entire Earth changes and cycles. That Mother Earth, obviously, Tom, is a very active participant, and particularly around the Ring of Fire. But when you get earthquakes that are in the deep, igneous, thick rock of northern, let's say, New York State, up through the New England area and in southern Canada, that's an interesting phenomenon that goes on worldwide. We'll be back, ladies and gentlemen, more with Tom Harris in hour number 2, Executive Director, International Climate Science Coalition. Lots of words, but good words indeed. And in 30 seconds or so before the clock runs out, just tell us how we can get in touch with you again.
Oh, right. It's www.icsc-climate.com or go to AmericaOutloud.news and check out our radio show, The Other Side of the Story.
And you know what, ladies and gentlemen, just a little bit of a sky update because that's what people tell me they want to hear on this particular archive. If you're an observer with a telescope and you're out there tonight, not everybody has one, the largest moon in Saturn's system, it's one that has incredible, level of oxygen and atmosphere of sorts. It will transit across the planet itself, and we'll talk more about that, how you can see it if you have a telescope. The shadow of Titan moves across the great Saturn, the original ring planet. More when we come back in hour number 2 on the Dr. Sky Experience.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
3 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, hour number 2 begins here on Talk Radio 77 WABC with the Dr. Sky Experience. Our guest, and I always say this, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you appreciate it, many of you telling that you do, it's very difficult to get one great guest and discuss a topic in 1 hour. So we try to do this with a 2-hour format in most cases, and we appreciate all of you out there. To get in touch with us, it's 1-800-848-9222. And my email, I love that and appreciate all those emails. I do respond promptly. DRSKY@WABCRadio.com. And naturally, to listen to all the other great hosts that you find here on this particular radio station going into its 104th year on the air. Amazing. Over a century. You can, of course, listen at WABCRadio.com, to the podcast archives, or RedAppleAudioNetworks.com. Thanking them ahead of time, the helmsmen, Tony and Bill, their finger on the button there to maintain the power of this great signal going here, not only around the city, the nation, the world, but I'm sure all the way out to the cosmos. Tom Harris, we continue here in hour number 2. He's the executive director of the International Climate Science Coalition. If you're just joining us, we're talking about some, in his opinion, some of the things that are going on that may not necessarily be true, that some in the legacy and downstream or mainstream media report about the subject of climate change. And to be fair with the other listeners, Tom Harris, let's say good morning to Dave in Lockport, New York, where it's 79 degrees there. What a beautiful temperature, as it's 106 degrees here in Phoenix, Arizona. So good morning to you, Dave. How are you doing?
It's pretty nice here. Hi, Tom. Hi, Steve.
Hey.
Look, my belief is that anybody that claims they know what's going on is either a fool, a liar, or an idiot. Because the cycles of our planet and our universe are hundreds of thousands of years long. So how can you pretend to know what's going on? I mean, these people are idiots, you know. And and on a personal note, Steve, did you ever read Nerves? You know who I am now.
You know, I do, and let me say this, always honest with you and everybody listening. No, I haven't. Shame on me, but not necessarily that deep. I know you'll give me forgiveness. But why don't you just email me that information to the DRSKY@WABCRadio.com, and I promise I'll respond.
You got to read it. But
yes, I'd like to. Right.
These people that claim they know what's going on, they can't possibly be right, because our history doesn't go back that far.
Yeah, and when they get next week's weather right, then I might start to think that they have a chance of getting next century's climate right. You know, it's amazing. Well, the computer models that they're using to forecast climate disaster, you know what the range of forecast is for a doubling of CO2? The range is 1.8 to about 5.5. In other words, they're saying, well, the outcome could be anything from relatively trivial to very dangerous. So they don't know what's going on.
Man, look, guys, I've lived for 74 years, and I've seen weather, extremes. I live in Western New York. We're kind of moderated by the lakes, the Great Lakes here, because we're in the horseshoe. But I've seen pretty extreme weather in my lifetime, and they all got it wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Dave, I remember driving up through that area, Batavia and Buffalo, and I remember going there in business. I was in another world, another business at the time, and I was there during January one year, and I'd never seen more snow in my life. And tell me I'm not crazy. I thought I saw people in snowmobiles with these giant big flags on top. You couldn't even see around the 9-foot snowdrifts. It was incredible.
You're darn right. Yeah. Hey, I lived through the blizzard of 77, and I made it 5 miles from where I worked to my mom's house, and I was stuck there for 3 or 4 days. Wow. And when I stopped at a gas station because my car was missing, I opened the hood and all I could see was white. I closed the hood and kept going. I got to the end of my mother's driveway and the car quit, and it stayed there for 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. I got to tell you about one quote from a scientist called Christopher Essex. He was one of Canada's leaders in climate modeling. He's an applied mathematician, just retired from University of Western Ontario. He wrote a book with Ross McKittrick called Taken by Storm. And he says that not only do we not, or are we not able to forecast climate, we may never be able to forecast climate because it's a chaotic, nonlinear system that we really cannot model. Okay, so here is one of the leading climate modelers and experts in the world on computer models. He's saying that not only can we not forecast climate accurately, we may never be able to because the system is so... And so what that tells you is that the whole idea that we can control something that we can't even forecast, we should just simply adapt to it as it happens. And that's one of the main things that we should do. Now, here's the sad thing. Most of the money, something like 90% of that $3 billion a day, is going into trying to stop climate change. Very little is being put on to helping real people adapt to what climate change does. And that, to me, is a crime. I mean, you're basically saying that the possible discomfort of people in a century is more important than helping real people today. And that, to me, is just completely wrong.
Tom, that's interesting. Dave in Lockport, thank you for calling us. And one day we'll share a story between you and I or in an email. I spent some time in Watertown, New York in another winter, and I never saw more snow than I did there. God bless the folks in Watertown, New York. It was an amazing experience. But for a story for another time. But Tom Harris, let's talk about something. One of my areas that I'm really, endeared about and studied very well is that of the solar science. And this is interesting. I take a telescope out many times during the week, Safe Solar Telescope. And it has the ability to look deep into the edges of the sun to see these big prominences, these plasma things coming off the sun. But, not to just, stand on a soapbox here, but I spent a lot of time in mapping the sun, solar cycles and such. So talk about this. Solar cycle 25, they're saying, is very, very powerful. We're not sure when the max peak of this really is, because what we're seeing is many of the sunspot groups, if I have this correct, in the two hemispheres of the sun. We now have been waiting for seeing the northern hemisphere of the sun to maybe kick in, where it's always kind of like in a differential. There's not the same numbers in each of these latitudes. So the sun is like a breathing entity, and I mean that in a science way, in a spiritual way. Talk about this whole solar cycle 25 and some of the problems that we have relating to climate.
Yeah. Well, the UN, through the IPCC, they say that the variation in the sun's output and the impact on the Earth is very small. And they're talking about 0.5% of a change in solar radiation during these short 11-year sunspot cycles. But they're missing something really important, Dr. Sky. It's not just the direct energy that comes from the sun that changes with respect to Earth's climate. It does something very different in a field called cosmoclimatology. It's a new field. It basically talks about how the cosmos affects our climate. And here's how it works. In deep space, you have supernovas, which are constantly blowing up all over our galaxy. Exactly. And they flood that part of the galaxy with what are called cosmic rays. Now, it's interesting, galactic cosmic rays, it's kind of misnamed because they're actually particles, but they named them when they thought they were rays. So those galactic cosmic rays are coming into our solar system all the time. And when they hit the atmosphere, they actually create clouds, and that cools the planet. Now, when the sun is more active, like at the peak of a solar cycle, two things happen. One is the Earth gets a bit warmer because there's more sunlight because the sun is more active. But the other thing that happens is that the sun's magnetic field and solar wind push away some of these galactic cosmic rays.
Correct.
So what that means is the Earth has less clouds. And when there's less clouds, the Earth gets hotter. So there's an amplifier. And the amplifier is such that some scientists think that most of the warming in the 20th century was caused by this combination between the change in solar output, which, by the way, in the 1990s, there was a number of papers put out showing that the solar output was the highest it had been in thousands of years. But regardless, the amplifier, which is this secondary effect where it pushes away the galactic cosmic rays so you have less clouds, means that the Earth gets hotter still. And if you take both of them into account, different scientists have different opinions, but the one I most agree with is they say 70% of the warming of the 20th century is probably due to changes in the sun. So that means that we got only 30% left over for all the other factors, which includes things like ocean currents and, of course, CO2. So right away you realize that, wow, that big ball in the sky has a pretty big impact.
And it's so amazing, as you talk very correctly about that. I mean, just to put this in another simpler term, maybe for people to understand this in the dynamics, when solar activity is high, the big protective bubble, the magnetosphere, or the magnetic field of the Earth, is going to deflect a lot of those cosmic rays. So then when we go on the reverse side, when there's a solar minimum, we're going to have, a higher induction of those cosmic rays. But you're so right. That's something I didn't bring up about the relative, cloud production. That's an important thing because clouds are so important to maintaining a stable Earth and environment.
Yeah, and I got to tell you one thing I just read the other day. This is actually coming out of that DOE report that was just put out in support of the endangerment finding. What they're talking about is a 1 to 2% change in cloud cover would have more impact to global warming than a doubling of carbon dioxide from humans. A 1 to 2%, just a tiny change in cloud cover will obliterate all of the change that we cause.
It's amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, the phone lines are always open here for you. That's one of the reasons why we have a show, is that we want to hear your dialogue. We want to hear what you have to say. The number 1-800-848-9222. Use it often, and we certainly love dialogue in the many forms of conversation. That's the one that I'm sure we all enjoy. But that's interesting. Continuing here with the sun, we had this major event that happened last May of 2024, and I'm sure many listeners, maybe yourself being up in the higher latitudes, this incredible display of the aurora borealis in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere that complement the aurora australis. They recently renamed that solar storm the Gannon storm. This is interesting. After an astrophysicist who had done so much work, I believe she had passed away, just after this whole research that she did on this. But let's go back to September of 1859. We talk about this event called the Carrington event. In September of 1859, literally, if we had all the electronics then that we have now, it would be just mayhem, totally a destructive thing. And then you guys had in Canada, if I'm correct, the 1989 solar superstorm. Tell me this, you're a Canadian and you probably experienced it, the intense blackout that occurred from this, I believe, 1989, solar storm. So how dependent we are about these things that happen on the sun.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, when you have these massive Carrington events, they're called, they actually will cause huge changes in electromagnetic input to the Earth system, and they can totally mess up, different electronic systems. And back in the 1800s, the one you talked about, they said that sparks were flying from the telegraph wires. That the whole system went down because they were using teletype, of course, and so these are massive events that really show that we have little control over what actually happens to our planet, and that's where I go back to George Carlin, and I wish to heaven that he were still alive.
Absolutely.
Because, he goes through the kinds of things that happen to the Earth naturally, including things like the Carrington event. And he says, thousands of years of asteroid bombardment, volcanic eruptions that cover half of continents. And then he ends off with, and we're worried about a few plastic bags. And, I think what he does is he puts it in perspective. The kinds of changes that nature does all by itself are millions of times more than anything that we're doing. So the whole idea that we control the climate is the height of hubris. It's ridiculous. It sounds like something out of a science fiction story like Star Trek. But, the bottom line is nature is very powerful, and at the very least, we have to adapt and prepare for it. And that's why I'm upset that we spend almost all of our money trying to control it, which we can't do.
Absolutely. It's funny, a personal story. I was in Las Vegas ages ago, and I'm standing at a Circle K, and I bought a hot dog and a drink. And I hear this voice, and I look around the corner, and sure enough, that's the man, George Carlin. So I go over.
Is that right?
Yeah, I walk over to him and I go, Mr. Carlin, it's an honor, hi, how you doing? I didn't want to get an autograph. I just said, hi. I go, well, I talk about astronomy and space. And he goes, I can name all the bright stars in the heavens. And boy, let me tell you something. He rattled those things off like it was amazing.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It sounded like it was if you had a recorder, it was going at triple speed, and I was like, that guy is incredible.
He was so good. You have to put up with a lot of swearing, but he was wonderful. There's another Carlin that I should bring up, and it's Alan Carlin. When the EPA put together their endangerment finding, they opened it up to comment, within the agency. Alan Carlin was actually a leading economist in the EPA, and he wrote a dissenting report. He actually showed that much of the endangerment finding was wrong. It was not based on the latest science, that the economic impact would be terrible, okay? And they basically told him, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember his exact words because he's not alive now, but he said that the EPA told him that they had already decided they were going to make CO2 and these other greenhouse gases dangerous to human health and welfare, and so that his report was not helpful.
Wow.
Yeah, and apparently others in the EPA were silenced too. So, I mean, this was a political decision. And, there's an interesting phrase that I like to use when things like this come up, and that is this. They always talk about evidence-based decision-making.
Correct.
Well, what this is decision-based evidence-making. Because they decided what the answer was before they actually gathered the evidence.
How traditional, right? That's terrible. That's unbelievable. Why can't we have critical thinking on subjects like this? I mean, the young people, and again, I'll be 70, God bless, and I hope everybody's healthy out there, whatever age you are. But it's like so amazing. I talked to a lot of young folks today, and it's like they're so enamored by this whole thing about saving the planet. And again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't save our planet. It's just that let's hear more about the other side. Let's hear more of the Tom Harrises. And obviously, we don't hear much of this. Have you ever been removed, or I hate to use the word, thrown out of any university for trying to give the other side of this controversial subject?
It's funny. For 4 years, I taught climate change, a geologic perspective at Carleton University. Ooh. And it went well. We had 1,500 students, I guess, because a lot of it was done remotely. After I left, after I turned the course back over to the original professor, because I was only doing it as an interim, I was attacked by the Center for Skeptical Inquiry. It's pretty ironic because they were so upset that I was allowed to teach this skeptical science at Carleton University, actually, in Canada. And there was a Center of Skeptical Inquiry who didn't want to have a skeptic.
Amazing.
But, so that's the only bad effect that I've had. It's actually been really good for me because, working in aerospace was great, but this allows me to combine communication and all sorts of factors, media stuff, with the science. And the science is fascinating, quite frankly.
Oh, it is. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us here an hour or two, if you're going through the dial and you've come upon this amazing radio station, Talk Radio 77 WABC, our guest is Tom Harris. You're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. Who is he? The Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. And, of course, our number, 1-800-848-9222 to get in on the dialogue with your questions and comments. But I want you to take on these particular things, refuting so-called many of these claims made by climate alarmists, as this article I'm reading here. Number one, take this on. The Antarctic Peninsula is shrinking. What say Tom Harris on that one? That's one of the number one claim that I'm reading this off the internet.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a lot of underwater volcanoes in that region. Sure. So that just might have something to do with it. But if you look at the Antarctic as a whole, it's not shrinking. And in fact, the ice buildup, you look at the South Pole Station, I think it's called the Amundsen Station, they actually have to keep pushing it up. They have it basically built on stilts, and they have to keep pushing it up because the ice keeps increasing. So, that peninsula, we're seeing a significant amount of melting, but that's almost certainly because of the underwater volcanoes in the area. But the Antarctic as a whole, don't worry about it.
Right, and then number two claim, according to this report that I'm reading here, what's the report? Refuting 12 claims made by climate alarmists. And I'm trying to find out the source because we want to try to give everybody accurate information, of course, and truth. Glaciers are melting throughout the world. Now, I'll jump in here. There was a giant iceberg that broke off of Antarctica the size of the state of Connecticut. So some would say, well, there you go. That's caused by what? Climate change, right, Tom Harris? But maybe not necessarily. What say you?
Yeah, you have to realize that, glaciers retreat, glaciers advance. And if we have a choice, we would rather see them retreat because, you look at during the Little Ice Age in the 1700s, glaciers advanced very quickly in places like Switzerland, and they completely overran some towns. Okay, some villages and towns were completely overrun with glaciers. So if you've got a choice between advancing or retreating glaciers, since they never stand still, you're going to want to have them retreating. In some cases, the glacier advances because it's colder. And that's something that's, a little bit surprising to some people, because you get more snow at the peak of the glacier and it feeds the glacier. In the case of the Antarctic, when you see these things, these calving pieces falling off the Antarctic, that's because the actual amount of snow cover in the continent is so big it's pushing stuff off the edge. I mean, think of a frying pan. Let's say you're frying a pancake. If you put too much batter, it's going to go over the edge of your pan, and that's what's happening with these glaciers in the Antarctic. They're calving big chunks because the ice cover is actually increasing.
That's amazing. And obviously, here's another one that I think is, well, I'm not going to laugh at it. I want you as our expert to, take those on. Another claim is that global warming is causing more tornadoes. I mean, that's interesting, and I don't know where they get that from, but what say you regarding that?
Well, that's an interesting point that was actually brought up by the report that the DOE just put out, the Department of Energy, that they're using to help back up the retraction of the endangerment finding. What they found was that whether it was hurricanes, tornadoes, droughts, floods, there is no statistical evidence to indicate that they're actually increasing in the United States. And, that same conclusion came to by an open letter to The Hague. And remember, we're talking about the World Court of Justice, which made that judgment just a couple of weeks ago. We can talk about that in a second. But Richard Lindzen, an MIT professor, leading expert in climate, Will Happer from Princeton University, another leading expert, and Coonan, who, of course, as I said earlier, was one of Obama's top climate people. They put together an open letter to The Hague in which they basically said, look, the science does not back up what you're saying. And the increase in, tornadoes, hurricanes, it's just not happening. It's just not there if you actually look at the data. And again, I alert people, go back and look at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration website and look at the database. I mean, it's just not there. So no, there's no increase in hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts. It's all baloney.
That's interesting. And just to let the audience know that I just try not to make anything up and never would, always honest. This information that we could go on, but to get the callers involved in here, is from the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Environment and Public Works from the office of the chairman, Jim Inhofe. And that's an interesting story here. It goes on and on talking about how we can take an objective view about what many are telling us is that the climate science is settled. And go on that topic for a few minutes before we hit the bottom of the hour. We have about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
This is interesting. Where did they come up with this? I mean, who came up with the thing that says this is settled? Was this an international court of environmental justice or whatever they call it? I mean, tell me, where did they come up with this? Where did they come up with this? That's an
interesting question. I actually wrote to Canada's CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and I said, where are you finding that there's this consensus of world scientists that the science is settled? Where are you finding this? So the president of the CBC tasked the ombudsman with the job of showing this ornery Harris guy that there was a consensus that the science was settled. And he sent me 10 pages. And in that 10 pages, he quoted the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, CNN. He quoted other media. He didn't even have one reference to a scientist or a scientific organization. And so that's what's happened, is the media have basically decided that there's a consensus, that the science is settled. I mean, the science is never settled. If it's settled, it's not science, okay?
Well, that also goes, no, Tom, not to interrupt, of course, but only for good reason here, politely, that this is very interesting. It also goes with the vaccination thing, that everybody's talking then about the COVID vaccine, that this is it. Obviously, this is what everybody has to get because, hey, we're the scientists and we're telling you this is the rightful thing. Look at how flawed that whole thing was, and that's a subject for what, another time?
Yeah, but the FDA just came out with this advisory to young men that this can cause serious cardiac problems.
I read it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And this is all supposedly settled science that it was all safe and effective. But no, in fact, if you hear somebody, I think it was the author of Jurassic Park. Who was the one that wrote that?
I wish I could remember at this hour.
Yeah, he also, right. It'll come back to me. But anyway, he basically wrote, if people are telling you that it's settled science, than the wool's being pulled over your eyes and they're trying to shut you up. Okay, and that I think is that is the main objective of saying settled science. No, we don't have to look at the science anymore. We're just moving ahead with policy. So shut up. And that is what happened to me when I was in Copenhagen at the Copenhagen Climate Conference. I tried to discuss it with some of these zealots from like the German delegation to the UN conference, and I thought they were going to assault me. I mean, it's really amazing. I said, look, no, this is science. We're supposed to be able to debate it. I mean, that was the whole concept behind science. Look at evidence. Look at theories, and if it doesn't work, well, you got to reject the theory.
Test your theories, test the theories, do the scientific method on things. And, we're not stupid out there. But let's get into this conversation when we come back after the hard break here at the bottom of the hour. Just a moment. Let's talk a little bit about this.
Michael Crichton, that was the one.
Michael Crichton, there you go. Thank you for awakening my senses at this early hour. But this is interesting. Let's get into a conversation about more and more about what happened, the devastating and heartfelt loss of life in Texas Hill Country. I was there in April for an eclipse of the sun in Junction, not too far from Kerrville. But I want to get your take on this because it's such an interesting story. And many are jumping. Some are blaming President Trump right off the top. Some are blaming, of course, the climate change is going on, and that's the cause. There's other opinions about this, and we'll get more, ladies and gentlemen, with your calls at 1-800-848-9222. Tom Harris, myself, Dr. Sky, and the Dr. Sky Experience when we return.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Hi there, space fans. This is Sean Kennedy. I played the role of Captain Pike and Lieutenant Duvall in the original Star Trek series. I would like you to keep looking at the stars, and with the help of my good friend Steve right here at Dr. Sky, I think you'll be aided and wonderfully inspired by this gentleman. Please tune into his show. He has a fabulous repertoire of different things from space and beyond. And from one space lover to another, keep listening to Dr. Sky.
People are spending way too much time thinking about climate change. Way too little time thinking about AI. A quote from Peter Thiel. We continue with 31 minutes after the hour, moving to the top of the next hour, completing our assignment here with the Dr. Sky Experience. Our special guest, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. And just a little bit, Tom, I wanted to go back to my home state of Arizona, talking about records in the world of weather. The maximum temperature in Arizona, are you sitting down, ladies and gentlemen, 128 degrees Fahrenheit, back on June 29th, 1994, Lake Havasu City. I think I was there, and it was hot. The minimum temperature, minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, back in January 7th of 1961 in Haldy Lake. The maximum 24-hour precipitation in Arizona was experienced with 11.4 inches of rain September 4th and 5th, 1970, at a location called Workman Creek. Now, ladies and gentlemen, finally, the snow depth of 91 inches back in 1967 in Haldy Lake. Why do we mention this? Because some of those dates, right, Tom Harris, they go way back in time when the population wasn't anywhere where it is today. Interesting stuff, don't you think?
Yeah, and one thing, Dr. Sky, we got to remember is that there's a certain amount of observation bias. A tornado could hit Oklahoma 100 years ago and nobody would see it. Now it's seen by thousands of people with cell phones. So what we're finding, for example, in the case of tornadoes, is that the incidence of weak tornadoes is actually increasing. The incidence of strong ones, which even 100 years ago they would have seen, is actually not increasing. And I think that's mainly because you just have more people with more cell phones, recording it. I looked up something during the break. I looked something up. You were talking about the Texas flooding. And I should actually read to you something from the Heartland Institute. These are a wonderful group of people who work.
Please do.
Yeah, they're very near Chicago, actually. They were in Chicago. They're now just outside of Chicago. It's heartland.org, and people should check them out. And they were talking about the flooding, and they said climate alarmists and ghoulish politicians were quick to blame both climate change and budget and staffing cuts by President Trump for the loss of life. The truth is the federal agency responsible for issuing flash flood warnings did its job and confirmed it had sufficient funding and staffing. Flash floods are a regular occurrence in the Texas Hill Country, with that very similar floodplain experiencing a similar tragedy in the 1980s. And here's their conclusion. I think it's just so powerful. The attempts to politicize this tragedy and use it to advance the climate agenda are disgusting and wrong.
Wow. That's well said and right to the point. No, you bring up good information. But the caller's rule, so let's continue here. You're lighting up the board here with a great fusion power brilliance here. Let's say good morning to Tony in New Jersey. Tony, good morning. You're on with Tom Harris. How are you?
Hi, Tom. Hi, Dr. Sky. Listen, I wanted to tell you just two things.
Yes.
I wanted to tell you that I am in New Jersey, not far from Hasbrook Heights.
Yes, ma'am.
I experienced my first earthquake tonight.
Oh, wow.
And
I hope you're okay.
It was just a weebie. It was just a 3.0. But I want to say that the energy was amazing. And at one point I wasn't quite sure how it was all going to turn out because I've never felt that kind of energy. Yes. Very strong, a bit exciting. So all is well here, thank goodness. And it was kind of exciting for a Saturday night.
Well, Tony, that'll wake up most people. And, I understand. I don't know if, maybe Tom knows more about this, that animals have a very interesting and intuitive sense. They can sense these things. I mean, do you have any animals? And was there any, notice maybe the animals walked around the house before this happened? Some say that they have this intuitive ability to sense these things before they happen.
No, I do have a cat named Elisa. She's a tuxedo, and she's amazing. But she slept through the whole thing.
Wow, that's a good one.
I've heard that they sense magnetic field changes.
Do they?
Sense other sorts of different kinds of infrared and other radiation that might be a precursor to a quake. It's interesting because we were in Italy on holidays just a couple of weeks ago, and we learned that sitting under Naples, there is a volcano much bigger than Vesuvius. Okay, they didn't know this. They didn't know this when they built. Yeah, they didn't know it when they built Naples. But apparently, it's unstable, and they're monitoring all kinds of things. That's looking amazing. At changes in radiation, looking at changes in stress in the local. Because they'll have 5 million people to evacuate if that thing goes off, and it is unstable right now. So volcanoes, animals are able to detect a lot of things that we need instruments to see.
Well, Tony, thank you for that update for the interesting earthquake. I mean, I'm all the way here in Arizona, and obviously I didn't feel that one because we haven't had too many out here, thank goodness. But I hope everybody's well. And obviously it's interesting because the rock there is considerably deeper, harder, if we want to call that. And I don't know how deep into the earth that was, but I'm sure the WABC news team will be on this, as they are always, giving us the latest information. Tony, thank you for calling. I appreciate your experience. Hope you're okay. Let's say good morning to Alexis in Queens. You're on with Tom Harris on the Dr. Sky Experience. Good morning.
Yes, is it for me?
Yes, sir. You're on the air.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, the phone went silent. Good morning, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to speak to you. Apropos to I want to make a point, please. The point being that about 30 years ago, a group of so-called scientists, professors of universities and others in power got together and said, we need something to put our claim to fame on the record. And so they created this mythology of climate change and linking in with the new Democratic administration that came in under Clinton and such, Obama and Biden, along with the mass media. They created this whole mythology of climate change, which succeeded in defrauding the American people out of $7 or $8 trillion on projects that do not work. The solar cell factories under Obama that went bankrupt immediately. The things with Biden, with the turbines, which have hurt the environment hundreds of times worse.
Right.
If you imagine. What they did, in essence, sir, is to form one of the largest racketeering, influence, and corrupt organizations in the history of this country.
Well, Alexis, I think you say it so well, and I think you have a very newfound friend in Tom Harris. Your response, Tom, to a gentleman that's got a lot of skin in the game here. He knows what he's talking about. It's interesting.
Yeah, sure. Well, I didn't know about that, but I'm not surprised because that's what happened in the United Kingdom. Margaret Thatcher was in a big fight with the coal miners, and she wanted some way to weaken the coal industry. So she essentially said to the Met Office, the meteorological office, look, there's a whole pile of money on the table here. If you can find that coal contributes to climate change, it's a big threat. And so they did. They just basically made it up. And so what happened in the UK sounds like exactly what Alexis is describing happening in the United States. I mean, this is driven by politics. It's not driven by real science.
Yes. Alexis, you say it so well, and you get the last word here as we got a full board, but thanks for being part of the show. Your final comment?
Yeah, my final comment, I will make it as brief as I can. Look,
yes,
this planet was formed some 4 billion years ago or so. What is going on the immediate surface crust of this planet and just beneath it, the earthquakes, the storms, the violent eruptions of volcanoes and all this is the game. This is like it or not. It is, as in the words of a famous judge, what is going on with this world is a crapshoot. If you get my meaning.
You say it so well.
Anything can happen, and sure enough, it will. So what I'm grateful for, finally, in conclusion, is that the fact that this new administration in the White House is putting an end to this horrific nightmare and fraud perpetrated on this country.
Alexis, thank you. You say it so well, but we're going to move forward. Thank you so much for being part of our show. Let's now say good morning to Brian in Valley Stream. Brian, you're on with Tom Harris. How you doing there?
Yeah, I agree with a lot you say, but the calling comment was a little diminishing the impact of the plastics in the ocean.
Oh,
by a few plastic bags, you got miles of like reefs of garbage floating in the ocean.
You do?
No?
Yeah.
So how do you do that? By saying a few plastic bags. I mean, I agree with everything you say. I'm not for all that, and Colin's a classic great guy, but that one comment, plastics is a big problem.
Yeah. He's a comedian, and you know the audience
but he's not always on
their approval. But you're right. I mean, plastic bags in the ocean are a serious threat in some areas. But it's interesting because Patrick Moore, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace, he wrote a book that you should look up, and it's called. Let's see. I can't remember the name, but it's his most recent book. It'll come back to me as I'm describing. And he actually looks at a lot of this plastics issue, and he maintains, and remember, he's one of the founders of Greenpeace, that the whole plastics in the ocean issue is massively exaggerated. And I don't personally know.
Not according to Brian, right? And he's right.
Yeah, I don't know which is. You should look it up. It's
you know what it is? Where I live, I go because I feed a lot of stray animals. In the gutters along the streets, there's certain towns out here in Nassau and by Queens, there's just tons of plastic bottles and everything ready to go into the waterways.
Yeah, it's horrible.
And it's horrible. And no one throws garbage away, and I think it builds up. It goes into the waterways in the local areas. Eventually goes into the ocean. So it's
and 90%, apparently 90% of the plastic in the ocean is from Southeast Asia. It's from China, it's from Vietnam, it's from those countries. So, I mean, we're not perfect, of course, but most of it's coming from Southeast Asia. But yeah, you have to look up Patrick Moore on Google, and it'll take Patrick Moore. He was one of the founders of Greenpeace, and he's written a book basically talking about all these different prophets of doom, as he calls it, and he dismantles a lot of the plastics issue. And
no, you have to look that up. But Brian, we're a little pressed on time. But no, you bring up a good point, and I'll add one more thing here. There are these giant gyres that they call in the ocean, as Tom was talking about. That if you go out in the ocean, you'd see this big, just swirling mass of stuff. Satellites show it. It's just that horrible plastic. Brian, thank you for being part of the Dr. Sky experience with your information. It's very important. Nobody should pollute. That's something people can stop really quickly if they get together. Brian in Valley Stream, thanks for being part of the show. We appreciate your time this morning. Tom, that's interesting. We're coming up on the next break here, but I wanted to get into when we come back finally, because we got a whole board of callers too. I'd like to talk a little bit more about this. The blame that President Trump is getting by some, excuse me, in the area for the Texas Hill Country floods. That's an interesting story. And much more, ladies and gentlemen, with our special guest, Tom Harris. Sean in Brooklyn, Kevin in Mount Vernon, and anybody else at 1-800-848-9222. We do our best to get you here to have your voice on Talk Radio 77. WABC. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Dr. Alex Hills, Distinguished Service Professor at Carnegie Mellon University and creator of the world's first Wi-Fi network. I'm also author of a new book called Wi-Fi and the Bad Boys of Radio. And you're listening to the Dr. Sky Show.
A foolish faith in authority is the worst enemy of truth. That, according to the great physicist Albert Einstein. We continue with Tom Harris, and the board's lit up here like a Roman candle would, and in a safe way. Let's say good morning to Sean.
I got to tell you the full book name. It's called Fake Invisible Catastrophes and Prophets of Doom. That's by Patrick Moore. And Mark Morano out of Climate Depot did a very good review, and he talks about the plastics part. And maybe we can talk about that later if there's time.
No, that's an interesting subject. Let's say good morning to Sean in Brooklyn, because the callers here rule on this particular radio show. Good morning. How you doing?
Good morning, sir. I'd like to get right to it.
Go ahead.
I moved western North Carolina. Cloud seeding. You familiar with that term?
I know about it, but I'm sure our guest knows way more about it. But are you concerned about this? I mean, have you been affected by this?
Absolutely.
Tell us more.
Absolutely.
Tell us more.
Absolutely. What happened in Texas happened in North Carolina. It's happening all across the country. It happened in New Mexico. It happened in Vermont. 2-3 feet of rain in hours. Now, you look up in the sky. I saw it. I looked up. I watched. I was like, wow, look at those planes. I saw the plane. I saw the trail. Then I saw another trail. And I thought, again, you hear it, but you don't believe it until I see it with my own eyes. These were jets. They were high up. They were at least 20,000, maybe 15,000 up. And I'm like, is that the cloud seeding they're doing? And they crisscross the sky in western North Carolina. And I'm like, I had the question, why? Who is doing it? Who's paying for it?
Well, Sean, you bring up a good subject because there's a lot of controversy about not just seeding the clouds for rain, but that goes off into another whole subject. But let me back away here because time is of the essence. You bring up some good points. Tom Harris, take on what Sean's talking about. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a form of what they call geoengineering. In other words, actually trying to artificially change the Earth in some way or other to achieve whatever objectives they're looking at. Now, it's interesting because Patrick Moore is one of our board members, and he has looked into that quite seriously, and he says that, no, most of what we're seeing is just water vapor. My specialty was jet engines, and you get jet engines at certain altitudes with certain environmental conditions, and they'll produce long contrails, which are basically water vapor. And the other thing, of course, is that if the engine is not operating at its peak efficiency, it puts out a lot more particulate pollution. So it's not an area that I can pretend to be an expert in, but I will say that there's a lot of debate about this because jet engines do make these long contrails naturally from water vapor, from particulate pollution. Whether it's a geoengineering project or not, I hear arguments on both sides, but Patrick Moore, our lead scientist, says no, he doesn't think it is.
But, Tom, there's a big difference between the chemtrail stories and the cloud seeding. Sean, you get the last word. We got many callers, but everybody's important, so you bring up some good stuff. Go ahead.
I'll make it quick. The problem is, I tried to call the airport. The airport's not going to tell me. Now, the thing is, like, my safety, I'm like, this is serious. They don't want people knowing this. And if whoever's doing it, it's causing people to lose their lives.
That's
raining
horrible.
like that. I've seen an accidental video of the plane that left the whatever the machine. Because I took aviation back in college, so I know how aircraft engines work. But someone is paying somebody to go up with a jet and seed the cloud.
Sean, that's going to have to be
dangerous.
Yeah, that's going to have to be the best we can. But you bring up some good points here. And, hey, I appreciate your call, and I mean this sincerely. Hope we talk again, and we'll bring up many more excellent guests to talk about this. So thanks, Sean in Brooklyn. Let's talk a little bit
I just want to clarify quickly. Patrick Moore says the chemtrail is concerned. He doesn't think it's true. But, yes, they do see clouds. That's a pretty normal thing to do in a lot of the world.
Well, when you brought up the name Patrick Moore, I was getting a little bit unsettled because I thought it was my hero from the I guess he was knighted the astronaut in the astronomy world, the Patrick Moore from the days of the astronomy. He did a television show until he was 100 years old or something over at the BBC.
Yeah, he was amazing.
But that's not the that's not the person with Patrick we're talking about here, obviously.
No, that's right. Patrick Moore is a PhD in ecology.
Well, here we go. Let's continue with Kevin in Mount Vernon. Patient callers, you're on with Tom Harris. Good morning, Kevin. All right, Kevin is gone. Well, that gives us a few more minutes to talk about this. Here's something fascinating that I've been researching, and your commentary is most important. The whole story about the Texas Hill Country floods and the horrific damage, the loss of life, of course, number one, the Guadalupe River. I was there in that little town of Junction for the eclipse in April last year, 2024. Amazing people, amazing food if you like barbecue, but here's the point. What we think, according to meteorologists, and I wanted to get your take on this, Tropical Storm Barry, which was a very early season tropical storm, was a little hurricane, then tropical storm, merged with another Pacific storm, and apparently, according to the meteorological stories, it just kind of got stuck in doing this rotation over that area. But here's the interesting thing. They had a horrific flood back in 1932. They had another one in 1987. But, Tom, going along with your thesis about that, man-made climate change may not be the thing here, what the heck was the cause of back in 1932 if indeed there weren't as many people, and it may simply have been the confluence together of these two storms? Take that on before we go to the end of the show. This is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why looking at history is so important, because, the similar flooding that occurred in Texas Hill Country in the 1980s, was that caused by humans too? I mean, it's sort of crazy because, if you look at long time frame perspective about climate, you see all kinds of extreme events. Like during the Little Ice Age, there were events that were so severe that it actually led to them going after witches, because they thought that witches were causing, terrible climate change. And Sally Ballunius, who actually used to be a scientist at Harvard University, she did a lot of studying of this. And she showed that how they wanted to blame the extreme weather from the Little Ice Age on humans in some way or another. And, of course, they picked on witches, and they killed thousands of people. And even men, actually, who supported the witches were killed because they were considered to be warlocks. So people should look it up. Sally Ballunius, that's how you spell it, but you actually pronounce it Sally Ballunius. She's a PhD from Harvard, and she was driven away from the school, unfortunately. But she's done a lot of very exciting and interesting work showing how the climate scare of the Little Ice Age that led to all these witch trials is actually not that dissimilar to going after scientists who disagree with the climate scare today. I mean, scientists who disagree not only face firing from their universities or a lack of funding, in some cases their lives are threatened. Like one of my friends.
That's a shame, you bet. No, that's horrible.
I don't want to say his name because I don't want to encourage this to happen again, but there was a big protest. There was a big protest outside his office. He works for NASA, and he had a bullet put through his office window. Yes. Tim Ball, for example, who was our lead climate expert for a long time, he's passed away. He had 5 serious death threats. So a lot of scientists who are not necessarily politically oriented, they're not really gregarious, outgoing people. They don't want to get in these sorts of fights. And so it's much easier for the scientists who think that the climate scare is bogus to just stay quiet and publish their papers, but not go on the press, not go in the media. And, so this is a really serious thing because science has been massively slowed down, our advances in science, by the politicization of this issue, so that the many, many scientists who are not as brave as Richard Lindzen and Roy Spencer and the others I named, many scientists agree, but they will not speak out. So that's why shows like yours is so important, because we have to make it a comfortable environment.
Well, you make it popular, but I wanted to interrupt here and do, just before we go to the top of the hour, with a little sky report. It relates somewhat to what we're talking about. The largest moon of Saturn, here we go, way out about 826 million miles from us right now, is going to cast its shadow on Saturn. Now, many people may be going, what's he talking about? If those of you out there that have a telescope, a small one, maybe 200-300 magnification, right now, in about some 25 minutes, Titan's shadow, which is very rare, will be cast across the big ball of the giant planet Saturn. That starts at 2:25 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Mid-transit, of course, at about 4:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Convert times to where you are. But the reason I mention that, Tom Harris, is that satellite has, on the surface of that particular moon, a whole world with an atmosphere with ethane and methane lakes. And it, too, is involved in a strange climate change. But you know what? Who do you blame for that? Are there a bunch of Titanians down there that are causing this?
You know, one thing important to understand, Dr. Sky, is that the methane that you see on Titan was obviously not caused by fossils. Okay?
Right.
And so what it tells you is that there may be huge deposits of methane deep in the earth that are not formed as a result of fossilization. There may be massive methane deposits deep in the crust that are caused by geologic processes. And so anyone who tells you that, we're going to run out of natural gas, well, maybe not. I mean, we already have like centuries of natural gas because of fracking. There may be huge supplies of natural gas caused by geologic processes, perhaps similar to what's happening on Titan.
That's exactly right. So if you have a telescope, and I'm going to go out here after the show and go outside in the backyard with the telescope already set up, and I promise if I get any pictures, I'll make sure I send them. But, ladies and gentlemen, you have an email from me. It's DRSKY, that is, at WABCRadio.com. But more important, Tom Harris, tell us again how people can get in touch with you. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for talking about this. You're always welcome here, and we'll continue in other iterations. How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. They just go to the website, www.icsc-climate.com. That's the easiest way, and my email address. Check out icsc.com, which is focused on our country, and you can actually learn about Patrick Moore, who's on our board.
It's an interesting story. You know, Tom Harris, it's been a great 2 hours here. Next week, ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue with these kind of conversations. If you're a beginner or new listeners, I should say, thank you so much. A new caller, first-time caller. We always appreciate our regular callers to the Dr. Sky Experience. The subject matter is all about astronomy, space, aviation, weather, celebrity guests in the mix, stories of American exceptionalism, and whatever you would like to talk about in those realms. Send us an email, and I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, you'll get a quick response from me. Thanks to our friends Bill and Tony navigating this big, powerful signal of Talk Radio 77 WABC. My wish to you, health and happiness, and a beautiful weekend as we continue here on the Dr. Sky Experience. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. You can hear the Dr. Sky Experience Saturday mornings, midnight to 2 a.m. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?